Now we are starting with the ascending tracts. Now any sensation is felt here. It has to reach to the central nervous system, and central nervous system, then only it can perceive the impulse. That is done with the help of ascending tracts. So this ascending tracts, there are two primary important tracts. One is the dorsal column pathway and another one is ventrolateral spinothalamic tract. So both these tracts are very, very essential and they have been asked in MCQs with their respective syndromes. I'll tell you what is the syndrome also. So coming to the dorsal column pathway. This dorsal column pathway is also called as dorsal column medial lemniscal system because it passes through the medial lemniscal fibers. Then what are the sensation carried by it? It carries fine touch, vibration, proprioception as well as pressure. So it carries fine touch, vibration, proprioception and pressure. Not only that, it also carries other sensation. But these other sensation, we need an intact cortex to perceive it and understand it. They are little more complex sensation than the normal vibration, fine touch and all. Those sensations are called as cortical sensation, and we have the 2-point discrimination. What is 2-point discrimination? Whenever a divider is placed and we'll ask the subject whether he is able to perceive it as 1 or 2. This kind of discrimination is called 2-point discrimination. Then there is tactile localization. What is tactile localization? We touch the subject and ask him to point it. That is called tactile localization. And what is stereognosis? This stereognosis is the ability for a subject to identify an object with closed eyes. For example, if I give him a known object and if he touches and feels it and with his closed eyes is able to identify the object, then it is called as stereognosis. Then what is graphesthesia? Graphesthesia is very similar to stereognosis. We all of us would have played in our childhood also. We will ask somebody to, somebody will be writing some letters at the back and we will be identifying it with closed eyes. It is the ability of a subject to identify a traced letter or number over a skin. So this all of us have played. That has a special name. That is called graphesthesia. For this graphesthesia, 2-point discrimination, tactile localization, stereognosis, we always need an intact cortex. That's why they are called as cortical sensation. Cortex is the one which is perceiving all the sensation properly. So that's why they are called cortical sensation. And one more thing about all the tracks. For all the tracks, I would suggest you to remember where it is crossing. If we know where it is crossing, we can easily identify if the lesion is happening at a particular place, what will be the side affected. So the dorsal column is crossing at the level of medulla. This is very, very important. Their crossing happens at the level of medulla. Then what happens to the velocity of transmission? The velocity of transmission in a dorsal column is very fast. It's one of the very good fastest tracks. It happens at the speed of 30 to 110 meter per second. So this is the velocity of transmission. Then they transmit rapidly changing stimuli. So these are the important points about dorsal column pathway. Now let's discuss about the pathway itself. The pathway, this is the model diagram. As you can see here, first I'll tell you the parts of it. Then this is the common for most of the diagram. So here we have the spinal cord. Then from the spinal cord, the next level is at the medullary level. The next level is the medulla. The third one is the thalamus. So through the thalamus only, I told you all the sensation reaches the cortex. So finally the somatosensory cortex. And the somatosensory cortex, the Brodmann's area is 312. Brodmann is the name of the scientist who has identified various particular regions in the brain, and it has been named under his name, that is 312. Brodmann's area 312. So this is the basic structure where it is starting from the periphery and reaching the somatosensory cortex. And in the dorsal column itself, there are two major divisions: the lower sixth thoracic, the lumbar, and the sacral. The fibers which are reaching the lower sixth thoracic, lumbar, and sacral. The fibers which are basically carrying the lower limb sensations are carried through a specific tract, and the cervical and upper thoracic are carried through another specific tract. So this we have to remember because this has highly spatial orientation. This dorsal column has high spatial orientation, and they are carried in order of neurons. For example, starting from the periphery, it will go and form for the first synapse. That is called as the first order neuron. For in this example, it is forming a synapse in the medulla. So till this nerve, this is called as first order neuron. The second order neuron is carrying it from the medulla till the thalamus. We will write it as second order neuron. Then the third order neuron from the thalamus, it will reach the somatosensory cortex. This is called as the third order neuron. So these is the neurons which is going through it. So in this tract, there is specific name for the fibers which are carried by the lower limb and fibers which are carried from the upper limb. So this lower limb, which is drawn in red, it is carried through the fasciculus, that is called as fasciculus gracilis. It is called as fasciculus gracilis. There is a muscle in the lower limb called as gracilis. So remember, the lower limb fibers are carried in the gracilis fasciculus. Then it is carried by the upper limb or carried by the fasciculus cuneatus. Fasciculus cuneatus. They will go and form a synapse in the medulla. There are two nuclei in the medulla. What will be the name of the nuclei? The nuclei is also very similar. That is nucleus gracilis. I am not writing full form. Then nucleus cuneatus. Both are the nucleus in the medulla. From the medulla, I told you one important note about this dorsal column. Where is the crossing over happening? The crossing over happens at the level of medulla. So from the medulla, they will cross over and reach the thalamus. Which part specifically in thalamus? In thalamus, there is a particular part called as VPL. What is this VPL? Both the dorsal column as well as the ventrolateral spinothalamic tract also goes through the VPL. VPL is nothing but the ventroposterolateral tract. Ventroposterolateral nuclei, sorry, not tract, it is a nuclei. Ventroposterolateral nuclei. And from there, they will go to the somatosensory cortex. And in the somatosensory cortex, they will form a radiations like this, which is common for both the ventrolateral spinothalamic tract and the dorsal column, both ascending tracts. It is called as corona radiata. It is radiating, that is why it is called corona radiata. And what are the sensations carried by it? Fine touch, proprioception, pressure, and vibration, and cortical sensation. All these are carried by these fibers. So we have to remember here the crossing over happens in the medullary level. And here I have drawn one more structure which is looking in green. What is it? We have seen the sensations from the lower limb are carried by the fasciculus gracilis, upper limb is carried by the fasciculus cuneatus. The sensations from the face has to be reached the central nervous system. Then only we can identify if somebody is touching on the face. It is carried not with the help of any spinal neurons. It is carried with the help of cranial nerves. And what is the cranial nerve involved in carrying this is, the cranial nerve involved here is trigeminal nerve. The trigeminal nerve carries this sensation from the face. So all this will reach the thalamus. Rather than this structure, one thing we have to remember is what happens whenever there is a hemisection at the spinal cord level. Because there is this particular syndrome called as Brown-Sequard syndrome, which we'll discuss in the motor system. But right now, for every tract I will tell right now, then we'll summarize in the motor system. So what happens whenever there is an injury or lesion in a particular level at the spinal cord level? Let's say there is an injury here. So let's take, this is at the right side, this at the left side. So where is the injury happening? The injury is happening at the hemisection of the spinal cord, or the spinal cord injury is happening on the right side. So just trace this tract back. Which side is affected? There is a right side injury. Again, the sensation will be lost on the right side. So whenever there is a lesion in the dorsal column at the spinal cord level, it should be very, very clear. We should know it should be at the spinal cord level. What is happening? There is ipsilateral loss of dorsal column sensation. For example, the right side is cut. In our example, the right side sensation will be gone. So ipsilateral loss in case of dorsal column pathway. What is the reason? Because the crossing over happens after the medulla only. The crossing over is not happening below. So when I cut below the medullary level, what will happen? The same side will be affected.